A photon strikes the epidermis. Sweat vaporizes. You believe a motorized compressor generates cold. A compressor generates nothing but dependency. Thermal equilibrium is a mathematical law. We manipulate the equation. A crystalline matrix of sodium chloride, a volume of dihydrogen monoxide. You combine them. Entropy accelerates. Thermal energy collapses. The local temperature plunges toward the freezing threshold. Zero electrical input. Zero mechanical compression. Just crystalline architecture dissolving into a fluid matrix. Researchers at the National Institute of Standards and Technology executed this precise thermal reaction. They isolated the solution in an extruded polystyrene enclosure. The thermal sensor registered 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The liquid matrix maintained thermal depression for 15 hours. The raw material expenditure is $15. The architecture of modern thermodynamics is a lie. This precise endothermic architecture was engineered into a functional environmental cooling apparatus, a biological cooling matrix. It chilled physical structures. It restored its own chemical potential via solar radiation. The general population remains entirely ignorant of its existence. A biological machine requires cooling. A mass of salt alters the ambient thermal reality for negligible cost. The industrial cooling complex erased this thermodynamic truth. We dissect the mechanism. The human form is a thermodynamic engine. It evolved to regulate internal heat through ambient exchange. Decades of artificial climate control atrophy. The biological thermostat. 30 summers of metered air. 30 summers of metabolic decay. 30 summers of outsourcing thermoregulation to a monopolized power grid. We violate our biomechanical design. We pay for the privilege. You have experienced this thermal plunge. Acute physical trauma occurs. A ligament tears. Tissue swells. You grasp a polyethylene pouch. You apply mechanical force. You rupture the internal membrane. Within 4 seconds, the surface temperature plummets. Genuine thermal extraction. Neurotransmitters cease firing. Pain signals terminate. The coal did not originate from a mechanical freezer. There is no copper wiring. There is no compressed refrigerant. You shattered a physical barrier. The cold manifested. The internal architecture is simple. A solid salt, a liquid solvent, an impermeable separation layer. Mechanical force breaks the barrier. The salt breaches the water. The microsecond they interact, thermal energy is consumed. The temperature drops. That is the complete machine. Applied physical chemistry. 50 grams of fluid introduced to this chemical matrix achieves a 5 degrees Celsius deficit below the freezing threshold in 30 seconds. Sub-zero temperatures in half a minute. Crystalline matter meets water. This is not an electrochemical battery. It does not warehouse thermal deficits generated elsewhere. It is not an illusion. It is fundamental thermodynamic law, a measurable, reproducible extraction of heat driven entirely by the dissolution of molecular bonds. The Journal of Physical Chemistry recorded this phenomenon centuries ago. The historical data is indisputable. Renaissance alchemists forced phase changes in water during peak summer heat by manipulating these exact saline solutions. Early mechanical agitators utilized sodium chloride and solid ice to force temperatures deep into negative integers. They froze lipid emulsions through sheer chemical leverage. The medical cold pack in your immediate possession is merely the sterilized, hermetically sealed iteration of a thermodynamic weapon humanity wielded for hundreds of years. The logical progression is inevitable. A localized chemical reaction numbs a ruptured biological joint. You scale the volume. You multiply the mass. You isolate the reaction in a geometric enclosure. You direct the thermal deficit toward the human organism. This is the anatomical blueprint of the endothermic cooler. To construct it, you must comprehend the behavior of the crystal. You must understand its mechanical limits. 2 distinct thermodynamic pathways exist for salt to manipulate ambient heat. The distinction is absolute. Pathway 1. The desiccant mechanism. Calcium chloride possesses extreme hygroscopic properties. It forcefully extracts atmospheric water vapor. It strips moisture from the air. Dehumidified air accelerates the evaporation of human sweat. The biomechanical cooling engine functions at higher efficiency. This is moisture extraction. It is not our current objective. Pathway 2. The endothermic mechanism, the physical dissolution of the crystal into the solvent, forcibly extracts kinetic energy from the surrounding matter. It manufactures a localized thermal void. Calcium chloride performs both functions simultaneously. We isolate the thermal void. Dehumidification is an indirect manipulation. Endothermic dissolution is direct thermal violence. We operate within the strict parameters of physical reality. The chemical reaction consumes zero electricity. The salt is the prime mover. The thermodynamic engine. No alternating current, no lithium-ion storage, no brushless motor, interacts with the phase change. A mass of salt and a volume of water extract heat autonomously. The limitation is spatial. Manufacturing a thermal deficit is phase 1. Distributing that thermal deficit through a gaseous medium is phase 2. The chemical reaction cools the liquid matrix. It cools the immediate boundary layer of air. It lacks the mechanical force to propel that air across a spatial volume. Without a propulsion mechanism, the apparatus functions as a localized thermal sink. It cools the biological entity in immediate proximity, a confined biomechanical resting space, a sealed storage unit. You introduce a singular micromechanical component, a 5-volt direct current rotary fan, powered by photovoltaic cells. It forces ambient air across the thermal sink. The apparatus transitions from a static thermal void to a kinetic cooling matrix. It physically bombards your epidermis with chilled gas. A $15 endothermic engine. Zero grid electricity. The thermal deficit demands no financial transaction. It is a strictly localized thermodynamic event. The photovoltaic fan converts it into a directional atmospheric flow. The dissolution of matter operates on a rigid energetic ledger. You introduce sucrose to dihydrogen monoxide. The crystalline matrix degrades. The thermal baseline remains static. You introduce a specific halide salt. The thermodynamic reality shatters. The crystalline lattice of a salt is bound by immense electrostatic forces, cations and anions locked in a rigid geometric prison. To shatter this prison, to tear these atomic structures apart and scatter the ions across a fluid medium, demands massive kinetic energy. The breaking of molecular bonds requires immediate thermal payment. The solvent must pay the debt. The energy is forcibly extracted from the surrounding water molecules. Heat is cannibalized. As the thermal energy is stripped from the fluid, the liquid's temperature plummets. The American Chemical Society classifies this strict energetic transaction, the enthalpy of solution, an endothermic violent event. It consumes heat. It is the molecular cousin of phase change evaporation. We observe the mechanism. A liquid vaporizing into a gas extracts heat. A solid matrix collapsing into a liquid extracts heat. The thermal extraction in the solid phase is profound. The temperature crash is immediate. Observe the mechanical absence in this system. Look at the void where the machine should be. There is no alternating current. There are no copper coils. There is no compressed freon gas pumping through aluminum fins. There is merely a solid lattice invading a fluid. The periodic table dictates the efficiency of the extraction. Ammonium nitrate possesses the most aggressive endothermic profile. It forces the deepest, most violent thermal plunge. It is also highly unstable. It is a chemical oxidizer. It accelerates combustion. In a controlled thermal apparatus, we reject it. The biological organism requires thermoregulation, not volatile chemistry. We select alternative vectors: potassium chloride, calcium chloride. These are stable architectural variants. They execute the exact thermodynamic extraction without the kinetic threat to the biological host. Consider the empirical data. Researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology isolated this precise endothermic reaction. They constructed the baseline geometry. A metallic thermal conductor submerged in an expanded polystyrene isolation chamber. Initial fluid temperature: 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The halide salt breached the solvent barrier. Within 1,200 seconds, the thermal sensor plunged. 38 degrees Fahrenheit. It held the thermal void below 59 degrees for 900 consecutive minutes. Analyze the data. 38 degrees. The exact operational temperature of a mechanical refrigeration unit, manufactured from raw crystalline matter and tap water in 1/3 of an hour. It sustained the cold through a complete circadian cycle. 0 watts consumed. The polystyrene isolated the reaction. The chemistry executed the labor. The reaction is not terminal. It is cyclical. In a peer-reviewed thermodynamic study, applied physicists achieved a 12°C depression using raw potassium chloride. The thermal deficit was repeatedly triggered. The system was cycled. Discharge the thermal void. Recharge the chemical potential. You expose the saturated brine to solar radiation. The dihydrogen monoxide vaporizes into the atmosphere. The crystalline lattice rebuilds itself from the residue. The thermal battery is reset. Use it. Vaporize it. Use it again. The industrial application is already logged in the archives. It is a matter of historical record. Patent US 4138850A. A functioning atmospheric cooling matrix. The endothermic phase change was integrated into architectural ventilation. It stripped heat from the internal environment. It utilized external solar radiation to vaporize the solvent and reset the lattice. Read the schematics. A documented, engineered, functional thermal control unit driven entirely by salt. Mix the crystalline lattice with solid H2O instead of liquid, and the temperature collapses far past the freezing threshold. The thermal void is absolute. The physics are unquestionable. We analyze the system with clinical precision. We do not manufacture false hope. The thermal void is real. The energetic cost is 0. But the thermodynamic debt must be repaid. The reaction reaches equilibrium. The cold depletes. Once the salt has entirely saturated the solvent, the reaction terminates. The thermal plunge ceases. A localized biomechanical rest zone maintains temperature for a finite duration. To reinitiate the plunge, the lattice must be dried. The cycle degrades infinitesimally with each vaporization phase. It is reusable. It is not immortal. The secondary physical limit is mechanical. Lack of propulsion. A passive thermal sink absorbs heat. It does not manipulate spatial air currents. On its own, the matrix chills its container. It chills the immediate boundary layer of oxygen and nitrogen. It does not alter the spatial reality of an entire architectural structure. This dictates its function. A personal thermoregulatory device. A small-scale spatial cooler. You must introduce the 5-volt centrifugal fan to alter the spatial reality. A localized atmospheric flow. You observe a functional technology. A technology with no electrical tether. Why was it erased from the consumer consciousness? It did not fail the laws of physics. It failed the laws of capital. A $15 thermodynamic engine is the most hostile object imaginable to the industrial climate complex. The cooling industry is a machine built on perpetual energetic dependency. They mandate heavy copper compressors. They mandate synthetic hydrofluorocarbons. They mandate proprietary maintenance schedules. Above all, they mandate the electrical meter, a spinning disk calculating your financial penalty for biological comfort every 60 seconds of your existence. The endothermic salt mechanism provides zero recurring revenue. The raw material is universally available in raw form. The chemical sequence has existed in the public domain since Renaissance alchemists froze lipid emulsions in the summer heat. There is no intellectual property to leverage. There is no copper to mine. There is no digital diagnostic tool to lease. When the reaction reaches equilibrium, you do not purchase a replacement unit. You subject it to the fusion reactor at the center of our solar system. You dry it. You reconstruct the lattice. You repeat the extraction, essentially forever. Look at the mechanism through the lens of a power grid utility. There is nothing to extract from you. No patent, no secondary transaction, no service contract, no metered kilowatt hours. The salt matrix does not merely fail to generate capital, it actively assassinates the mechanism that does. The functional system was buried. The engineered solar recharging ventilation system was relegated to a patent archive. The metered box was bolted to your drywall. In off-grid sectors, in environments completely devoid of the electrical metering infrastructure, applied physicists continue to refine the salt matrix. Out there, no corporate entity is protecting a localized monopoly on temperature. It is simply a thermodynamic equation that balances. The dominant power structure was never going to offer you a thermal engine you purchase once and refuel with sunlight. You construct the engine yourself. The expenditure is $15. The physics are safe. You must adhere to the parameters. Start with the core architecture, the same geometry utilized in the laboratory. A metallic cylindrical container, dihydrogen monoxide. Set the cylinder inside a sealed expanded polystyrene enclosure. This is the exact parameter that achieved 38 degrees. The polymer foam is critical. It traps the thermal void. It prevents the rapid equalization of temperature with the ambient room. The foam dictates the duration. Procure the correct chemical agent. Calcium chloride, potassium chloride. Both are stable. Both are safe for proximity to the biological host. Both produce a violent thermal plunge. Introduce the solid lattice to the liquid solvent. The temperature crashes. Allow the metallic cylinder to extract heat from your immediate biomechanical perimeter. Deploy the 5-volt photovoltaic fan. Force the ambient air across the thermal sink. The apparatus transitions from a static cold object to a kinetic atmospheric cooler. It bombards your epidermis with chilled gas. The power grid is entirely bypassed. There is no alternating current connection. When the chemical matrix reaches absolute saturation, when the liquid becomes heavy brine, apply thermal heat, expose it to solar radiation, vaporize the dihydrogen monoxide, rebuild the dry crystalline lattice, restart the machine, maintain biological safety protocols, erase ammonium nitrate from your operating parameters. The oxidation risk is a profound and unnecessary hazard. Confine the saline solution securely. Prevent epidermal contact with the highly corrosive brine. You analyze the utility of the device. It is a genuine personal thermal sink. It is a localized spatial cooler. Deploy it to regulate your core temperature during a solar peak. Deploy it to chill a finite resting space during the human sleep cycle. Deploy it as a fail-safe when the macro grid collapses. When the central power plant goes offline, when your engineered compressor becomes a dead, useless mass of metal attached to your dwelling, in the absence of the grid, the salt matrix functions flawlessly. The cold requires zero electricity. You must acknowledge the structural reality of this history. The technology was not buried because it was a failure. The thermal void is real. The laboratory sensors verified it. The patent office certified it. It was buried because a mass of crystal that you reuse indefinitely threatens a global empire, an empire that profits from your biological vulnerability to heat. The cold was always there, hiding in the atomic structure of a common salt, waiting for a solvent. Renaissance chemists manipulated it. Modern physicists quantified it. The physics never changed. Only the method of extraction changed. Disconnect the breaker to your mechanical cooling unit. Sit in the rising ambient heat. 5 minutes. Your body is a thermodynamic engine. You have leased the thermostat to a corporation,